All right. So what are those hidden airflow features, right? Because the thing is, as Viraj said, since Airflow 2.0, there's been like ton of different features, and it's really hard to keep on track on what are those new features and what you can do with them and how to implement them, right? So what I'm going to try to do right now in this webinar is to give you all, I would say, a subset of those features that I think will be extremely useful for you. So stick with me. For this webinar, I would like to divide it in 3 different sections. So we're going to start with the CLI because there are some comments that you need to know. Then the UI, what you can do with the UI. We tend to forget about the UI, but you can do some pretty good stuff with it. Then last but not least, and obviously maybe the most interesting part for you is what about the DAGs? What can you do with the DAGs? What are those features that you may not know? So in terms of the CLI, as you know, the Airflow CLI is truly powerful. You can execute a ton of different commands. Actually, if you run the command airflow-h, you will see so many subgroups and so many commands that you can execute, right? But the question is, what are the commands that may be useful for you? And the first one is Airflow standalone. So maybe you don't know that command, but you know, when you install Airflow for the first time and then you want to run it, you have a few things to do. You have to initialize the metadatabase. You have to create that account. You have to run the Airflow scheduler. You have to run the Airflow web server, even the trigger, and you need to configure your executor and so on. So there are a bunch of things to do that take time. Now, with the Airflow standalone command, you can run an Airflow instance in a single process with all the components that you need, which means the web server, the scheduler, and the trigger. On top of that, an account is created for you, so you don't have to create it, and the metadatabase is initialized for you as well. So with this very simple command, Airflow standalone, you can run a single Airflow instance in a single process. It's really nice for, you know, making some experiments, making tests. And by the way, the executor that you will end up with is the sequential executor, as behind the scenes, the SQLite will be used. Okay, so again, Airflow standalone, you can run Airflow in a snap. Very useful. The second command that I would like to talk about is Airflow DB shell. You know, I don't know you, but I can't remember how many times I tried or I wanted to access my database, you know, to interact with the metadata of Airflow. And this may change if you use MySQL or SQLite or Postgres, right? Well, the good thing with Airflow DB shell is that you don't really care about this. With Airflow DB shell, you can access your database, whatever the database you use, basically. So if you use Postgres, you will end up with the pSQL interpreter, you know, so you just by running Airflow DB shell. Same thing if you use SQLite, you will end up with the interpreter of SQLite, and same thing for MySQL. So with Airflow DB shell, you end up with a shell so you can interact with your data easily. And I know that that command is not very well known, but truly useful. Okay, so no need to go into the container of your database and open pSQL and so on. No, you can just use Airflow DB shell. I love that command. Then we have Airflow info. And for that command, I would like to show you what you're going to get from it. So let's go back to our terminal. And by the way, here, I'm going to use the Astro CLI. So if you are a new user of Airflow, and actually even if you are an experienced user, the Astro CLI is really the easiest way to run Airflow locally. Okay, because there are many components to run and so on. The Astro CLI helps you with that. So take a look at it. That being said, let's access the Docker container, one of the Docker containers of Airflow, so we can interact with the Airflow CLI. For that, we can type docker ps and docker exec-it, and let's use the web server here. Okay, this is not important. So from there, I have access to the Airflow CLI, right? It's exactly like if you have Airflow installed on your machine. If I type airflow-h, I can see all the commands that I have access to. Now with Airflow info, if you type Airflow info, you access the crucial information of your Airflow instance. Let me show you this. If you hit enter and take a look at the system info, or actually the Apache Airflow info, you can see some very crucial information here. The first one is the executor, what executor you are currently using. In that case, the local executor. Remember that depending on your executor, you will execute your tasks differently. Then you have the SQL Alchemy connection, which is nothing more than the connection to your database. In that case, Postgres. And by the way, you should be careful with it because as you can see here, if you have hard-coded the value in your configuration file and someone has access to this command, well, that person will be able to access your credentials. I don't think that this is something that you want. Then you have the DAGs folder where your DAGs are, and same thing for the plugins. Okay, so some basic information, but pretty important. Then under the system info, what you really would like to take a look at is the Python version. In that case, 3.9. As you know, depending on the Python version that you use, you may have some differences. So it's good to know which Python version Airflow is running. Then the tools info. I would say Airflow expects that you have those tools installed along with your Airflow instance, but you don't have to. But those tools are really commonly used with Airflow. So for example, Git, if you use Kubernetes, kubectl, obviously, if you use Postgres, pSQL, and so on. Okay, so you may need to install those tools to interact with them from your data, from your DAGs, or from your DAGs. And it's good to see that, well, if it is not available, then you need to install it. You have this list right there. In addition, you have the path info, and wow, this one is crucial. Python path. Here's the thing. You know, as a best practice, you don't want to put the Python functions or things that are external to your DAGs in your folder DAGs. So instead, you are going to create a folder include, and in it, you will put your Python functions that you will call from your DAGs. But the thing is, you need to find a way to make Airflow aware of this folder, the folder include. And to do that, you need to include it, you need to add it to your Python path. And this is what you can check here. Python path, we have user local Airflow, and in user local Airflow, we can see the folder include right there. Okay, so if for some reasons you got some import errors, you may need to look. It's actually a good idea to look at the Python path. Okay, I'm pretty sure that you have already got some import errors. First thing first, take a look at the Python path. Then last but not least, the providers info. So as you know, since Airflow 2.0, Airflow is not a single package anymore. You know, that big single package. Instead, you're going to have multiple packages that you will need to install according to the tools that you want to use. For example, you want to interact with Kubernetes, you will install the corresponding provider. And that's what you can see here. I want to interact with Kubernetes, you want to interact with Kubernetes, then you will install the following provider. And the good thing is you also get the version. So if for some reasons you want to use an operator, or you want to actually create a connection, but you cannot see the connection type, then you need to install the corresponding provider. And to know what providers are installed in your Airflow instance, you can take a look at this list here. Okay. And there are like more than 80 different providers. So it's really nice to have this list. Right? So that's for Airflow info. Now, I would like to show you my two favorite comments. The first one is Airflow DAGs test. So with Airflow DAGs test, you are able to run a single DAG run of a DAG given an execution date. So it's really nice to just test your DAGs. Just test your DAG. How it works, extremely easy. Let's use a DAG. Let's use easy DAG here. I don't even know what this DAG does, but let's use it, right? It's pretty simple DAG. So let's use Airflow DAGs test and then the DAG ID. So in this case, it's easy_DAG and an execution date. So let's use the 1st of January, 2022, like that. If you hit enter, as you can see in a few seconds, you get one task instance that corresponds to T1 here. And finally, it's done. The DAG succeeded. That's what you can see here, succeeded 1. So it's really nice to test your DAG and run a single DAG run, a single instance of your DAG. Now you have to be careful with that command because that command generates metadata. What does it mean? It means that if you take a look at the Airflow UI right now and click on DAGs, well, you can see EasyDAG has one DAG run and one task instance with the execution date that we defined. So even if it is for testing your DAG, still you will end up with metadata, and depending on your DAG, you may end up with a lot of metadata. So be careful with it, but really nice to test your DAG. At least run it once. Now, the second command that I truly love, and this one, you should use it after every task that you add to your DAG. This one is Airflow tasks test. With Airflow task test, you're going to pass a DAG ID, the task ID of the task that you want to test, and an execution date. Really simple. So let me show you this. In this case, you want to test T1. You're going to type the DAG ID, easy_DAG, the task ID of the task that you want to test, T1, and an execution date in the past, like that. You hit enter, you wait a little bit, and you end up with marking task as success and the value that it is returned by that task, which is 1, 2, 3 in that case. This command, you should run it after each time you add a task to your DAG, right? You don't want to create all the tasks of your DAG, and then once you are done with your DAG, run all the tasks at once. You're going to be, you end up in a nightmare, right? You want to make sure that each time you add a new task to your DAG, it works. That task works. And Airflow task test is the best practice, is the good way to do that. The good thing with that command is that you are not going to create any metadata, or at least you are not going to create any DAG run or task instances. Indeed, if you take a look at the Airflow UI here and refresh the page, well, we don't have any new task instances, right? Neither DAG runs. But if for some reasons your task generates XComs, those XComs will exist, right? So you have to be careful with that. If you have a task that generates many XComs, or actually if you use that task with many different tasks that generate XComs, you may end up with a lot of XComs. Okay. So again, Airflow task test, a very best practice, but keep in mind, if you create XComs, you will end up with those XComs. All right, so that's it about the CLI. I know there are many other commands. I know that. And actually, thinking of that, I forgot one thing that I really would like to show you is, in addition to Airflow task test, you have an option, a secret option, which is -m. And with that option, let's say you have an exception in your task. So raise a value error here with my error, and you test your task again. This time you are going to end up with a Python debugger. Pretty useful, right? For debugging your DAG, for debugging your task, pretty useful. So with the option -m that you add to Airflow task test, you end up with a debugger. And from there, you can, for example, print the value of my_val. So if you type print_my_val, you see 1, 2, 3. Obviously, here it's extremely simple, but in your case, there is a good chance that you will have a very more complex task, and the Python debugger is really nice to check what's going on in your task. And by the way, if you want to learn more about, debugging your task, debugging your DAGs, please let us know. I think it's a very critical topic, and we could do a webinar about it. Okay, so that's it about the commands from the Airflow CLI, and I know there are many other commands, right? But I don't want to list all of them. I think those commands are not so well known, but extremely useful for you, right? Airflow standalone, Airflow task test, Airflow DAGs test, Airflow info, and Airflow DB share. Those 5 commands, very useful. Now it's time to move to the UI. What can you do with the UI? There is one thing that you can do with the UI. And the first question that I would like to ask you is, how can you differentiate your environments, right? There is a good chance that you have a development environment, a production environment, a staging environment, or maybe a QA environment, maybe a ton of different environments. But the question is, how can you quickly identify which environment you are working on? Well, guess what? You can do that with the Airflow UI. Let me show you how. So again, in this case, I'm going to use the Astro CLI, but you can do it with Airflow. So what you are going to do is you are going to configure a setting in Airflow, which is instance name. Under the section web server, you have instance name, instance underscore name, and you can define the name of your instance. Let me show you this. Right there, if we put in this environment file, Airflow underscore web server underscore instance underscore name, and say that this is actually the dev instance, and save the file. If you take a look at the Airflow UI right now, we have DAGs here. Okay, so let's save the file and restart the Airflow instance. Remember that whenever you modify something on the UI and actually a configuration setting of Airflow, you have to restart your Airflow instance. So let's wait a little bit. Okay, so as you can see, Postgres and the web server as well as the scheduler is getting restarted. We still need to wait a little bit here before getting Airflow up and running again. So let's see. Do we have any? Oh, and by the way, in terms of question, Eric, how is using Airflow DAGs test compared to Airflow DAGs backfill? With Airflow DAGs backfill, what you want is really, backfill your DAGs. You want to run all the non-triggered DAG runs or some triggered DAG runs between a period of time that you can define with Airflow DAGs backfill. With Airflow DAGs test, what you are really doing is just run a single instance, a single DAG run of your DAG. Okay, that's the difference between those two commands. All right, so now we have this Airflow UI back. Let's type admin. And as you can see, we obtain dev. So this is absolutely incredibly useful, right? Just by exporting this environment variable, Airflow underscore web server instance name, and put dev, staging, or prod, you will be able to quickly identify on which Airflow instance you are currently working. In this case, dev. And by the way, you can see dev as well here. Really nice feature and really easy to implement. I strongly advise you to use that feature if you run Airflow in production. Okay. Now, what you can do? Well, it's good to be able to differentiate your environments, but what about if you want to announce changes to users, right? If you run Airflow in production or in your company, I'm pretty sure that you are not the only one working on Airflow. So what about if you make a change to your configuration settings, or just you add a new DAG, or well, whatever you want, but you want to make sure that everybody is aware of this new change. How can you do that? Well, guess what? Again, with the Airflow UI, you can do that. And it's extremely simple. So let me show you this. Here in your Airflow instance, you are going to create a new folder. So let's create a new folder, config. And in that folder, you are going to create a new file, which is called Airflow underscore local underscore settings.py. Okay. In that file, you are going to add the following content. So from airflow.ww.utils import UI alert. Okay. And from there, you are going to add some alerts to this variable. So dashboard underscore UI alerts equals to, oops, not deprecation warning, equals to UI alert. And from there, you can put your message. So let's say, I don't know, there is a new update. Okay. There is a new update here. And you want to make sure that everybody is aware of this. And you can specify category equals to info, because this is not really critical, right? So you save the file and you restart your Airflow instance. Okay, so just by creating this alert and put that alert into dashboard UI alerts, you are going to have something. You are going to have something on the Airflow UI. So while I'm waiting for this Airflow instance to get back, let's take a look at some questions. There are email on failure and email on callback, but why not email on success of DAG run? That's a good question. But still, even if you don't have, I would say, because, well, you know, email on success is not really critical, right? I mean, being aware of that your DAG succeed, it's still important, but not critical. So still, if you want to know that your DAG has succeeded, you can still leverage the email operator, for example, to receive an email. Okay, so this is still something that you can do, and you will add this operator at the end of your DAG. Okay, so now we have this Airflow instance back. Let's type admin, admin. And as you can see, I obtained the following message. There is a new update. And this is great because at this point, you are able to make announcements to everybody that is using your Airflow instance very easily. Okay, but that's not all. You know, as you know, there are like different users, different roles. There are admins, users, OP, different roles. What about if you want to give a specific announcement to the admins or to the users or to the OPs? Again, very simple, right? You have roles here and you specified that this message is for user and admin. Why not? Okay, so here you put admin. But you also want to add a specific alert for the admins. Same thing, you are going to create a new alert. And let's say check user permissions, because, well, this is something pretty important to check, right? And because it's pretty important, let's say warning. You also have critical if you want. And for this specific message, we don't want to print it on for the users, only for the admins. So we're going to put roles equals to admin. Okay. And same thing, if we save the file and restart the Airflow instance again, as you may guess, we will be able to see this message. Okay, so let's wait a little bit until the Airflow instance is up. While I'm looking at your questions. Okay, for running tests or tasks and DAGs, what is the best way of injecting testing parameters for things like testing environment or test data sets or even test versions of the Jinja template params? Well, that's a pretty big question, but you can still leverage the environment variables to add some inputs to your tasks. I have to double check on this, but I'm not sure, Guz, if you can maybe be more specific on your question, because I'm not sure I understood well your question. Okay, so now we have the Airflow UI back and take a look at it. As you can see, this time we get the message, check user permissions. Okay, so don't hesitate to leverage this, because that will help you to communicate to changes to everybody in your company that is using Airflow. Okay. All right, so that's really what I wanted to show you about the Airflow UI. Obviously, there are other things that you can do with it. Don't hesitate to take a look at the Airflow documentation, but I think those two features are really not so well known and they're extremely powerful and useful. Okay, so you can make announcements and you can specify on which environment you are working on. And as you've discovered, it's really easy to do that. Okay, it's time to move to the, I would say maybe the most exciting part, which is the DAGs. So one question that you may have is how to create DAGs faster. And some of you may already know that, some of you not, but this is what I would like to show you is the Taskflow API. Let me show you this. What you need to know is that since Airflow 2.0, I think, there has been this introduction to the Taskflow API. And the Taskflow API is really a new way of creating your DAGs. We already done a webinar about it, but I think it's still important to talk about the Taskflow API because I don't see enough the Taskflow API used in the DAGs. So with the Taskflow API, you can create your DAGs in a very easy way and in a faster way. The Taskflow API is really like two things. You have the decorators and you have the XCOM args. So you can create XCOMs, you can share data between your tasks in a very easy way as well with the Taskflow API. But let me show you concretely what does it mean. So in those folder DAGs, we are going to create a new DAG very quickly. So Taskflow API, okay, so taskflow.py in this case. Then we create a new DAG. So we make the import from Airflow models, blah, blah, blah. The DAG ID is Taskflow here, that the scheduler interval is daily. There is no default arguments in this case. We can remove that. Let's put a start date as well, as you need to have a start date, right? So start date equals to date time. And same thing, the 1st of January, 2022, like that. Okay, so you have your DAG, an instance of your DAG. And now, in order to create tasks with the Taskflow API, it's really easy. You are not going to use the Python operator. You're not going to use, well, actually, let's stick with the Python operator. Instead of using the Python operator, you are going to use a decorator for it. So the first step is to import that decorator. So you type from airflow.decorators, and I strongly advise you to take a look at this module in Airflow. Import task. And what is this task decorator? It is the Python operator. It is the Python operator. So to create a task, it's really simple. You just type @task, right? And then your task. So you type def setup. Let's say my data here. And you want to print that data. Okay, setup with data, my data. And you want to return that data. Okay, by returning that data, you are going to create an XCOM, by the way. Okay, so you have created your first task. You can add a value to it. So it's really as simple as that. Just by doing this @task decorator, then the function, your Python function, it's exactly like if you were using the Python operator. Okay, but instead of defining the task ID, the Python callable function, and all of this stuff, you have everything at one place under the task decorator. Okay, we can quickly create another task. So task here, def load, and let's say my modified data. Again, you want to print it. So print my modified data, and here my modified data. Okay, then last but not least, thanks to the Taskflow API, you are not going to define the dependencies explicitly. You are going to define the dependencies just by calling the functions in the right way, in your order, in the order that you want. So basically, you are going to say, hey, I want to start setup first. So let's put a value here, 42. And then after setup is done, I want to use that data, okay, my data +2, so that will be 44, to the task load. So I put load here, like that, and that's it. By doing this, you are going to end up with a dependency between setup and load automatically. And as you can see, you have created a DAG very easy, very quickly, just by using the task decorator. And keep in mind, behind the task decorator, you have the Python operator. It's good to know that, maybe you want to define the task ID of your task. Maybe you want to define the trigger rule of your task. And you may wonder, well, where should I put that, right? Because before, with the Python operator, you will put, for example, trigger rule equals to something here. Okay. Well, in this case, you are going to do exactly the same thing, but here. So, for example, you could say trigger rule equals to all_success. Okay, so you can still use the exact same parameters as the classic operators in the decorators. That's what you are doing here. Okay, same thing for the task ID. You can still specify the task ID if you want. Okay, here you put task_ID and your task ID, my task ID. Okay. And by the way, there is not only a decorator for the Python operator. There is not a decorator for every operator, but you have a decorator for the Python operator, for Docker. Okay, so you have Docker. You also have a decorator for the virtual environment, virtual env, okay, which is really great if you want to run a task in a Python virtual environment. Good for avoid messing with your dependencies. And you have the branch one, the branch decorator. The branch decorator, what it is the branch Python operator. Then last but not least, and that's what we are going to see right now, we have the task group. So the task group is the next feature that some of you know, some of you don't, but the task group is absolutely crucial to know. Because, before Airflow 2.0, and actually I think it's before Airflow 2.0, and maybe some of you right now are using the sub-DAGs, and the sub-DAGs are extremely complex to use, right? I mean, think of it. The goal of the sub-DAG is just to group your tasks together. But you still have to use the sub-DAG operator, create a sub-DAG, so another DAG, and call that other DAG in your DAG with the sub-DAG operator. It's a lot of things to do just to group your tasks together. Again, guess what? With the task group, you are going to group your tasks together in a very easy way. And we are going to do that with the decorator. So let's create some new tasks. First thing first, here, let's say we have some ML tasks, machine learning tasks, right? So, and we want to group them together. We are going to create a new task group with the decorator, so task_group. We pass a group ID. We don't have to, but you can. So let's call that one ML_tasks. Okay. And then we defined ML_tasks with the value that we are going to pass. Okay, the value from setup here. Whoops, actually, it's not task group like that. It's task_group. And then we create two new tasks, very easy, at task def ML_1 value, then return value minus or plus 42. It doesn't really matter. And then we create a new task. Let's say ML_2, same thing, value, and we return value minus 42 this time. Okay, so by doing this, the objective is to group the two tasks, ML1 and ML2. ML1 and ML2 under the task group. So what you are going to do next is to just return the value of those two tasks. So you're going to type ML_1, then value, and ML_2 with the value. Okay, right? The last step, ML tasks, you put it there as you want to use the value from setup, and that's it. Okay, so just by using the task group decorator, you have grouped the tasks ML1 and ML2 together. But let me show you what it means. So let's take a look at the Airflow UI, which is not that. So let's refresh the page. Yep. Admin. Okay. And if we take a look at the Taskflow DAG here and click on graph, you obtain your tasks, your ML tasks grouped together. Okay, that's what you can see here. You have setup, you have ML tasks, and you have load. If you click on it, you have your two tasks, ML1 and ML2. So it's really easy to group your tasks together with task groups. If you use sub-DAGs, please go with the task groups. There is no real benefit right now to use sub-DAGs instead of task groups. And as you can see with the decorator, let me put this away. With the decorator, it's really easy to create your task groups. And by the way, with the task groups, there is something else that you can do is you can specify a default args, okay, some default arguments to your task groups. So for example, here, default underscore args, you could say, hey, there are some default arguments that I want to specify only for the tasks in my task group. So ML1 and ML2. Let's say ML1 and ML2 are very resource consuming tasks. You could specify a pool in those default args, and the pool will be used only in those tasks. Okay, not in setup or load. Okay. All right, good. There is another thing that I would like to show you. This is great. I mean, this is great, right? You group your tasks together, but what about ML1 and what about ML2? I mean, you don't really know what they are, like what you do in each one of those tasks. One thing that you can leverage is the age labels or the age modifiers. Above those beautiful dependencies, you can add some information. And let's do that. Let me show you how to do it with the Taskflow API. So again, in your Taskflow API, in your DAG, sorry, you are going to import this. So airflow.utils.age modifiers, or actually modifier, sorry, import label. Once you have this, you can create labels. And the way to do it maybe maybe a little bit complex, but no worries. Here, you are going to put value, then the usual operator to specify your dependencies between your tasks, then the label that you want to use. Let's say ML1 is actually decision tree. Okay, so you put decision tree here. Then you create another dependency like that. And here again, you are going to use value and then another label, which is in this case could be a random forest. Okay. And you specify the dependencies like that as well. Now, if you save the file and go back to the Airflow UI and refresh the page, well, actually, you may need to wait a little bit. Let's see if we don't have any error. We don't have any. Let's take a look at the graph again. Okay, that may take a little bit of time. So let me save the file and let me restart Airflow so it's quick here. Okay, one question from Liar. Is there a way to move XComs between decorated tasks and non-decorated tasks? Absolutely. Absolutely. Keep in mind that here I'm only using decorators, but you can still mix like I would say the classical operators and the decorators. Okay, so for example, if you have another task with, I don't know, the MySQL operator, you could do that. You could do like MySQL task here, and MySQL task here is the MySQL operator behind the scene. And you can share XComs between those two tasks. Okay, for example, load will return XCOM, and you will be able to get back this XCOM for MySQL task from your classical operator. Okay, so you can definitely mix both operators. It works. You will just need to use this, those angle brackets. Okay. All right, let's see if we have the Airflow UI back. So let's refresh the page. Okay, we have it. And as you can see, we obtain decision tree and random forest, which is great because now just by looking at your tag, just by looking at the graph, you are able to say, okay, actually this value from setup will go to ML1 and ML1 is a decision tree. ML2 is a random forest. And as you can imagine, if you have a big DAG, which I'm pretty sure is your case, with a lot of different dependencies, labels will help you a lot. Okay. Don't hesitate to use them. Okay, now there is just another thing that I would like to quickly talk about is the Airflow exceptions. So as you may know, if you want to test your DAGs, and this is good if you use, the commands Airflow DAGs test and Airflow task test, there are some Airflow exceptions that you can leverage to make some experiments. So for example, if you import from airflow.exceptions, and let's import Airflow fail exception, then Airflow exception, and finally Airflow skip exception. Okay, I'm pretty sure that you will use only those three. With those exceptions, you are able to modify the behavior of a task. So for example, if you decide to raise here Airflow exception and you put retries equal 3, what will happen is that by raising the Airflow exception here, your task fails, but your task will be retried 3 times as specified here. Now let's imagine that you don't want that. You want to fail your task and that's it. You don't want to rerun your task. In this case, you can leverage another exception, which is Airflow fail exception. And with Airflow fail exception, regardless of the number of retries that you have here, your task will fail once and only once. And if you want to check how your tasks behave if one of the upstream tasks is skipped, you can use Airflow skip exception. So by raising Airflow skip exception, the other tasks will be skipped. Okay, so this is a quick, nice tip. I know it's not so well known, but Airflow exceptions are really useful to test your DAGs, to test your tasks. So don't hesitate to use them. Airflow fail exception, regardless of the number of retries, your task fails once and only once. Airflow exception takes care of the number of retries, and Airflow skip exception if you want to skip your tasks. Okay, that was a quick bonus. Okay, all right. Now I would like to show you something else. And this is about how can you generate DAGs dynamically? Okay, I know this is a pretty popular topic, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure that you have already seen how to generate DAGs dynamically. There are many ways of generating DAGs dynamically. One with the single file method, which is, I'm pretty sure some of you use right now, where you have your globals and you basically have your DAGs generated in a single Python file. And you have the multi-files method where you generate your DAGs using a template and a script by leveraging JSON. Now, today, I would like to show you how to do it with Jinja. So what is Jinja? One thing that you need to know is that Apache Airflow uses Jinja to build its web pages and even to render values in your DAGs at runtime. But what is exactly Jinja? Well, Jinja is a template engine. And what does it mean? It means that you are going to have a template. So this is nothing more than a file with some placeholders, and those placeholders have a special notation. And then you are going to have a YAML file, right? In this case, we are going to use YAML files. In this YAML file, you have some values that you want to put into the template file in place of the placeholders. So the Jinja template engine, what it does, well, it takes those two files, merge them so that you end up with your new DAG. And that's exactly what you are going to see right now. So let's go back to, our code. The first thing that you need to do, is to go into your folder include, right? You should have a folder include, and again, you will put the external tasks or external stuff that you want to call from your DAGs. In it, you are going to create a folder, Dynamic DAG Jinja, for example. And then once you have that, the first step is to create a template DAG.jinja. That corresponds to the DAG that you want to generate for every configuration file. Okay, so for example, here, if you carefully take a look, we have a placeholder for the DAG ID. We have a placeholder for the catch-up parameter. And with Jinja, we can say, if the catch-up value from my configuration file doesn't exist, I can set false by default. We have a placeholder for the schedule interval, and we have a placeholder for the input that we want to give to the task extract. Okay, this is the template. Now we have multiple configuration files, YAML files. For example, we have the config DAG Apple. We have the DAG ID Apple with the schedule interval daily, catch up false, input 126. Same thing for DAG. For the Facebook DAG, we have the schedule interval daily, but this time we have the input 198. Okay, so we have those 3 configuration files, and so we want to generate 3 DAGs based on the template DAG. To do it, the last step, once you have your configuration files and your template file, is to create a very simple script, a generate dag.py script, where basically you are going to use the configuration files, your template, merge them with template.render, which is nothing more than Jinja. Okay, I know it's a lot here, so don't hesitate after that webinar to take a pause here, copy the code, and you will be able to generate your DAGs from there. So just by running this script, and I'm going to show you this right now, if we type Python include dynamic DAG underscore Jinja, and then generate underscore dag.py, hit enter. As you can see, we have 3 new DAGs here: get price Apple with the DAG ID, the schedule interval, and the false parameter, and the value 126 as specified in the configuration file. And same thing for Facebook, same thing for Google. So just by running a very simple script, I'm able to generate 3 DAGs. Why it is so good to do that is because you're going to end up with 1 file, 1 DAG. It's easier to debug. It's scalable. It scales very well. And you have the full control over the way you create your DAGs. Whereas with the single file method, you may end up with a lot of DAGs and errors if you modify that file by mistake. So I strongly advise you to use that way. Okay. The last thing that I would like to talk about quickly, because this is important, and I know a lot of people are not aware of that, how to wait for events smartly, right? They are like the sensors, and a sensor allows you to wait for an event to happen before moving to the next task. Well, one thing that you can do is, instead of using sensors, you can use deferrable operators. What is a deferrable operator? It's exactly like a sensor, but in a very smarter way. So sensor take worker slots. Each time you have a sensor waiting for something, you have a worker slot that it is taken. And this is a waste of resources, time, and you can end up with possible deadlocks. Okay, because that sensor will wait for a long period of time, and well, you are waiting for something that will happen sometimes, but you don't know when. So instead of using sensors, with the deferrable operators, those operators are able to suspend themselves and release worker slots so that you can execute other tasks while they are waiting, which is great. That reduces resource consumption, lower infrastructure cost, and they are more resilient. Why? Because to run those deferrable operators, there is another component, which is the triggerer. And the triggerer is in charge of managing those deferrable operators, and it is highly scalable, which means if your Airflow instance got down for some reasons, you will be able to get back your sensors. You will be able to get back where you left with your sensors. Okay, so you are not going to waste any more resources. And to use a smart deferrable operator is extremely simple. Take a look at the time sensor in sync here. Okay, you have airflow.sensors.time sensor. You have time sensor in sync. That's the deferrable operator version of time sensor. In this case, I'm going to wait for this specific time before executing the next task. And on top of that, if you want to take a look at some other deferrable operators, and again, you should use deferrable operators instead of sensors. They are not a deferrable operator. There is not a deferrable operator for every sensor at this time, but we will end up at this point. Astronomer has released the Astronomer providers package, and from there, you will have access to some incredible deferrable operators that will help you a lot, especially if you use sensors a lot. Okay, okay. So don't hesitate to take a look at the Astronomer website, deferrable operators. In the documentation, you will see a list of all deferrable operators that we have built for you. All right, last but not least, that's not what I wanted to tell you. How to stay up to date. Well, to stay up to date, there are really three ways. Take a look at the changelog of Airflow, take a look at the Slack channels, Airflow releases and announcements, the Astronomer Academy. I've put some work there. Then last but not least, my little trick. One thing that you can do is to take a look at the GitHub repository of Airflow and the milestones. In there, the milestones, you will be able to see what have been done, and you can keep track on the next updates. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that webinar. I know it's a lot. Please don't hesitate to take a look at the recording afterward. And I wish you a wonderful day, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Mark, that was great. Thanks, everyone, so much for coming. We'll talk to you soon.
Can we, Viraj, by the way, can we take maybe like just 5 minutes to answer some questions?
If you can stay over, we can definitely do that.
Let's do that.
There were so many questions this time. There were over 50 questions that have been answered. So why don't you take a few here if you can stay a few extra minutes.
Okay, let's do that quickly. Okay, let's see. Can we email alert on task level if SLA at task level fails? Task is independent of execution time. Yes, you can definitely implement SLAs as well. This is a feature that maybe not so well known, but you have an SLA system in Airflow, and this is defined at the DAG level and at the task level. Okay, so in the task you will have a parameter which is, I think, SLA, where you will be able to put like the time delta, the time that your task should take before ending up with an SLA error. Either way I already answered that question. If we wanted to create a custom operator to use in multiple DAGs, can we still use the task decorator and import that function from a file in various DAGs? Or is the task decorator specifically for tasks that are used once? For this, keep in mind that the task decorator is only for the Python operator, but you can still create your custom decorators. Okay, so if you want to use, I don't know, Viraj, let's say the MySQL operator, right? And you want to create your custom decorator, you can do it. You can do that. It's really up to you, and feel free to do that.
I dropped the link to our decorators guide in the chat as well, so I think that should be helpful.
Good idea. Good idea. Thank you so much. And one last question, maybe, how can I clear an entire group of tasks? You cannot do that at this point. The task groups, you cannot clear an entire task groups. Unfortunately, I guess that will come soon. And I think, will there be any new or updated certifications? I wanted to answer that question quickly. Yes, new certifications are coming soon. I cannot tell you exactly when and what will be the next certification, but trust me, you don't want to miss it, because what you have discovered during that webinar, we will dive into the details during that certification. That's it for me. Thank you so much, everybody.
Wow. Thanks, everyone.
It was great to see you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.